My name is Ross Smith. I'm Director of Test in the Skype division at Microsoft, and we've been exploring the use of game mechanics, gamification, productivity games, we call them, to actually get real work done for probably the last 10 years. So I'll talk a little bit about that and then some of the stuff that we're doing at a broader corporate level around gamifying our corporate learning.
And I'm Dawn Adams-Miller, currently in talent management at Cisco Systems. It's a personal thing for me to do the gamification stuff. I've done a lot of studying, but I've also had the opportunity to pilot some game-based learning at I used to work for Microsoft, sorry, I came out the wrong way, Cisco. And so I'm here to share some of the experience we had in that pilot.
Good morning, everyone. Bryan Austin, Game On Learning. I'm something known as the Chief Game Changer with Game On Learning. We're a company composed of a lot of very experienced learning and development professionals, and we've migrated to the space of specialization around learning gamification and serious learning games. It's our sole focus, and it's something we've immersed ourselves in for the last few years. It's a lot of fun, but more importantly, a way to really increase the impact of a lot of learning, and I'm sure that's part of what we're going to talk about as we go through the panel discussion today.
Well, thank you, distinguished panelists. So here's what we're going to do today. I'm going to talk a little bit about gamification and kind of set the scene here. So what is gamification? Probably some of you may be asking, and how can we see how that plays into context with learning and development. But I guess the first thing I need to start off by saying is that gamification is not about games, it's about learning. And what you're going to experience today is some learning. You're going to experience some learning in a couple of different ways. First of all, the panelists are going to share some of their best practices, some stories, and some of their successes, or perhaps some of their challenges. But we're also going to put you to task because you're all going to be participating in a short little game just in a few seconds. Again, I'm giving you that warning. This is going to be a game here today. Gamification extracts the motivational techniques out of games, and it uses them for life application learning. So in other words, you learn by doing, which is the best way to learn. And games, if they're done right, allows for quick feedback and progress and communications of goals that need to be accomplished. So that, in a sense, is what gamification is all about. And with that context, if you have any questions as we move along here, don't hesitate to ask. And don't worry, I have plenty of questions to ask because I'm a skeptic of games. And I didn't tell the panelists this because I've been doing a lot of the traditional training for many, many years. And games didn't quite fit into my model and what I was trying to do. So I'll be asking some tough questions, but I'm sure you'll appreciate the knowledge that's here on the stage with us. But what we're going to do here real quickly before we get started is we're going to start a game. And only Ross and Brian know what the game is. Dawn doesn't, but that's okay. Dawn's going to follow along, and I think she's going to find this a lot of fun. Because we tried 3 different types of models. We try to do this at the last second. It's one of the things I love about games. You can do things at the last second. So here's the objective. The objective is to learn about people in this room. And there will be 3 levels to this game. All right? So in 20 seconds, and I have the stopwatch, I want you to find something in common with someone near you. All right? Just one person. You cannot use sports. All right? And when you're done, raise your hand. Okay, so you have 20 seconds starting now.
All right, everybody, get your game on.
Cheater. Really?
3, 2, 1. All right, time's up. Time's up. All right, time's up. All right, don't worry if you didn't find something in common. All right, don't worry about that because you'll have a chance to participate in level 3, okay? All right? So if those who raised their hands, you all know who you are. You're now going to be taken to level number 2. Did I miss anything Ross said so far?
I just say that you're now teammates. You're collaborating together.
All right, so you're teammates, all right? So I'm going to give you a little bit more time for this one. You're going to have 3 minutes. And what you're going to do, that team of those 2 people, You're now going to recruit as many as you can that have that commonality. All right? Now, get as many people as you want here in the room. You have 3 minutes, and I'm starting now.
Run, everyone, run.
Remember, you're building teams. You're building teams. All right, you have 1 minute left. 1 minute left.
He's going to be the detractor.
All right, 20 seconds left. All right, 10 seconds.
What? Oh, I like 99 bottles.
All right, time's up. Time's up, everyone.
There you go. Is time up?
Time is up. Time is up. Now, you can stay all standing if you like in groups.
Yeah.
And this is the final Jeopardy, all right? So this can be much shorter. You're just going to have 90 seconds. We should pick two or three groups?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's see. We have a big group over there, and we have a big group over there. Those are the two biggest groups, aren't they? Yeah, those are the two biggest groups. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. With those two biggest groups, over there and over there, the people who did not raise their hands, okay, you get to join again now, try to see if you have anything in common with those two groups. All right?
And how much time?
And the others can too? And the others can too. Is it, hold on 1 second. How many three groups are there? 1, 2, 3?
And say, okay, in those 3 groups.
Okay, there's 3 groups. I'm sorry. Ladies and gentlemen, there's 3 groups. Hold on, don't cheat, don't cheat.
Yeah,
3 groups.
they're gone.
All right, go.
How many seconds?
90 seconds. 90.
90 seconds.
So the goal is to get the biggest group.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Wow, that's pretty interesting. What's that? Yeah, that's the good one.
Hey, Jim, it would be interesting, for example, to know if that group has in common, because they are mostly female.
Yeah, we'll find out. We'll find out. All right. I'll have the two who decided the group come up.
There you go.
All right. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, time is up. Time is up. Now, I'm just going to do a visual count here. The nonconformists, not bad. You did a pretty good job. That group over there, what did you all have in common over there? Married with children. Okay. And this group over here, what did you all have in common?
We knew.
All right. We kind of figured that out. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for participating in the game. Now, who are the 2 people who started that group? Who are the first 2 people? All right. So you 4, come and see me after at the lunch break. All right? Because with every game, there is a reward. So, do we achieve our objectives? Actually, Ross, you might as well pick up the microphone. You ask the question.
So did people achieve the objective we had by using games to get you to learn something about other people in the room?
That's what gamification is all about. So thanks for participating in that game. We just thought you'd like to get up and move about here before lunch. So let's talk about a couple of the things that happened there, because I'm actually very interested to know a little bit more of the details. And first of all, what is the difference, and I'll ask any of the panelists, is the difference between simulation and gaming? And I'll start with actually Dawn, since she went,
In my work in this area, I've had to come up with kind of a scheme between gamification, which is the mechanics being applied to a non-game environment, to simulation, which is the higher end of my little scheme. And so there's variations in between. There's game-based learning, which is mostly game, but there's a learning component to it. Then there's the serious games, which get into the simulation space, but still usually have a gaming component. And for me, simulations don't usually have a gaming component associated with them, but that's my definition.
would you agree, Brian?
I violently disagree with Dawn.
Very good. Thank you.
We were supposed to kind of get an edge going to this thing. But I almost always agree with Dawn. But the higher end game-based learning, it usually is going to have a simulation built into it, because you're looking at higher end cognitive skills or cognitive thinking skills, things along those lines. And the difference between something that may be referred to only as a simulation and something that is more of a game-based simulation or game-based learning, something along those lines, is simply the game theme. So if you take a simulation and you add a game theme to it, typically one where you've designed it from the ground up as a game, and it has a story, and it has characters, it has goals, increasingly complex scenarios, and so forth. It's got every element of a simulation in there. The only difference may be that people often think of a simulation as a realistic recreation of an aspect of a job. How do I operate this machinery? How do I use this IT application, etc.? And with a game, it's usually a little bit more applicable to soft skills, because you actually want to inject a degree of fantasy into it to separate it from the job environment just enough so people's minds stay focused on the big issue and don't nitpick aspects of the scenario. So that's my take.
And Ross, I picked you last because you're a little bit more visual, meaning at Skype at least.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, I guess. So yes, I have to agree. Did not inject any conflict in this question, but I think if I think about game mechanics or gamification, can or cannot be part of a simulation. And so game mechanics are great to keep people engaged and keep people motivated, and can be applied in a simulation, but don't necessarily have to be.
Okay. Well, you brought the term gaming mechanics. Are there some gaming mechanics that can be proven to be engaging?
Yes, I would say at some level and some dimension, all of them are. And so we tend to look at sort of three classes of mechanics. There's the player versus player, or glory and shame of the leaderboard. Can be impactful for some, maybe not everybody. But then you also want to add in sort of player versus self mechanics, which is sort of beat your own high score. Can you do some activity several days in a row? And then player versus environment, which are your puzzles and like a scavenger hunt type of activity that keep people engaged. And different ones work for different people at different times.
And Dawn's nodding your head. Can you tell us what engagement is?
Oh, okay.
Give you the tough questions.
It's making people feel good about what they're doing, so they want to keep doing it. That's probably the most simplest definition for me. And I was thinking about his gradation of the different mechanics, and I really like that. I hadn't heard that definition or splitting out before, but I think the end part, what he said, it's dependent upon what works for what person and what scenario. And that's really the nut that you have to crack in a game, is figuring out what's going to be the motivating factors that are going to make them engage, participate, and learn something. So I think that's, for me, I think I've narrowed it down. If I can figure that part out, actually the rest of it comes quite easily.
And Brian, I know you usually agree with Don. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely not. No. I think a lot of people know what engagement is, and a lot of times, though, in corporate learning these days, we're thinking a lot about what engagement isn't. We know when people are not engaged with the learning intuitively. If you're teaching a class, you can look out there and see it. If you implement and roll out an e-learning course and they're not taking it, that's a pretty good indication right there. But really, the notion of engagement, just from a brain function point of view, is that engagement is what happens when people open up their brains and they're receptive to learning. And the more you can get the brain embracing the learning, the more it actually begins to more effectively move things from short-term memory to long-term memory. And that's called learning, particularly on the knowledge side of it. So part of it is fun, but a lot of it has to do with activating the brain. And so, engagement is what first drew me and others to this space, because we had kind of gone through the advent of online learning 10 or 15 years ago, and it was great when it was novel, and now it's no longer novel. And a lot of organizations have difficulty getting their workforces to consume it. So the notion is, how can you make it more engaging? Because if it's not engaging, it's probably not going to be effective. And so, gamification strategies are wonderful for doing that. And we'll talk a little bit later about, well, okay, fine. So they're having fun. What happens on the back end? We'll get to that in a little bit.
But to follow up what you were just saying there, is gamification for knowledge transfer or behavioral change or for both?
Well, there we kind of get into a war of the words and so forth and what the definitions are. We tend to think of learning gamification as the notion of adding game mechanics and game elements to what is often traditionally designed learning. So, the most oversimplified thing is, let's just throw a couple of badges and a leaderboard in there and we're good to go. But if that's the universal answer, it's going to lose its novelty very rapidly. And the reality is that there are different gamification strategies that can be employed based on the type of content and the desired learning outcomes. So, and some of those are more expensive to build and do than others. So a lot of what, we do with organizations is try and consult with them a little bit to identify initiatives that may be good candidates for gamification at some level, and then more importantly, what strategies are likely to work, because it's not just a question of leaderboards and badges. It's like anything else. If it's not well designed, it won't be effective in achieving the learning outcomes, and certainly not transferring that back to performance on the job. So, oversimplify. You use different strategies to teach skills, behaviors, and so forth than you do to teach knowledge. And that kind of makes sense for all of you that have developed training. That's what you currently do anyway in the more traditional forms of learning.
Don, one of the things we talked about when we talked before coming here to this event, we talked about some terms for gamification. Are there some terms if someone's just getting into gamification for the first time that they should clue in on?
So there's a couple of them that come to mind. We've talked about points, badges, and leaderboards, and PBLs is what the industry calls them. And that is something that most people start out with, paying attention to. For me, the inside is what's the intrinsic or extrinsic motivation involved, and you need some of both to be an effective learning environment, and it's figuring out that intrinsic part that's really the hardest, and the one that I think makes it the most effective, but also takes a while to figure out. It's very easy to do points, badges, and leaderboards. It's very easy to give someone an award that may mean nothing to them whatsoever. But it's really hard to get to that point where it's really, really effective in there, and they'll play for 2 days straight. And I've had people do that with some of the game-based learning. They take the entire 6 weeks worth of training in 2 days because they're having such a good time.
And Ross, did you add to that?
Yeah, I think the term gamification has faced a lot of resistance from sort of traditional game designers for some similar reasons. And a quick show of hands of who would like to earn the Do More Work badge. And that's the problem, that the term can be misused, and it's not about just slapping a badge on something that's meaningless. but really about good game design and finding that intrinsic motivation to keep people engaged and keep people moving forward. And again, it's different for everyone, but that's where the beauty of game mechanics can play a big role, because you can tailor things. If people are motivated by being first on the leader, like we've seen, in the US, the manager is very motivated if they're not ahead of their team. And so you can use that in some ways, but in other cases, the leaderboard totally, if it's a fitness game or a health game, if you're last in taking the stairs, you don't like the leaderboard, so and you're not motivated by it. You don't want to be on it at all. So you really have to tailor the mechanics to the individual to keep them engaged.
Is there generational resistance?
There are differences. But what's been interesting is the rise in, people tend to think of the gamer as the 17-year-old boy in the basement on a console, but that's changing now with social games. That the average age is moving way up, and the up and coming generation, which is our new workforce, 97% of American teens play games every day, and so if that's the workforce, know your audience and be able to leverage it. But it definitely is changing with social games and the internet.
So talking about social games, Brian, can you give an example of a game that fits into a social setting?
Well, there's certainly a lot of them. I think the ones that many of you in the room are probably familiar with would be, a lot of the games that are on social media sites, Farmville and things like that. People of all ages play those things. We've had meetings recently with clients that were very, very conservative companies, and their request is, we want you to develop a game for us to roll out to our salespeople that kind of feels exactly like Angry Birds. So it's just interesting how people are looking for answers in this realm of learning. But I think regardless, oftentimes what organizations do is they get really focused on the game itself in whatever form it takes. And one of the things that's often left out or not thought enough about as part of the implementation is the social aspect to it. So if it's going to be rolled out to a certain constituency, perhaps a sales force or people in call centers or folks on the shop floor or whatever, it's essential to really think about including a social aspect to that, which could take many forms. And that's one thing that Dawn and her team did really well on a recent initiative that we worked with them on. The other thing is that, again, let's get back to more traditional learning. Game-based learning can be really great, but one of the challenges you want to make sure you think about is as people go through the game and as they complete the game, we want to make it crystal clear on how what they just did is relevant to their role in the organization. So one of the strategies that we found marvelously effective is to include games as part of the components of a blended learning program, where people go through the game, but then you may have a virtual trainer-led session that says, okay, it starts by saying everyone have fun, etc. But what it really gets down to is, what is it that you learned about that experience? Let's talk about that as a group, that relates to your role. What is it that you learned from that you would do differently back on the job? And whenever we've been able to build those sequences into a learning program that includes games, it's just remarkable, because people are jazzed up about playing the game, but then you also make sure you cover off the real reason they're there, which is to either go back to the job with a higher level of knowledge or improve skill, etc. And all of us that have been training for a particular length of time, we know how difficult it is to get people to actually transfer the learning back into visible performance on the job. And we've actually had more success with those sorts of blended strategies with games than anything I've seen in my career.
Don, what have you seen at Cisco? What kind of success stories? And how did you measure that the game was a success?
Well, we did several quantitative as well as qualitative We did a focus group after we did the pilot and got a lot of information. I did touch points along the way. And the reason I can follow on to what he was saying is we did what we called a learning debrief, which was something that they suggested. It was very effective. We interviewed some of the folks who took the games. We talked to them about how they applied it. And we used them as little mini case studies. And we just did a little webinar, and everybody talked about it. And what was even better about that is that there was a little cross-pollination. People figured out how to do it in their little space, but then when they saw how other people were doing it, they're like, oh, so it opened up some other things. I think one other thing that I enjoyed most out of watching this is that after maybe a couple of weeks, I started talking to some folks and found out that the game that they were playing had so impacted them that they couldn't watch negotiation anymore without telling how it was done wrong. And that wasn't one of the intended outcomes, to have any negotiations spoiled for these people. But yeah, they were like, man, I can't see this on TV anymore. I see where they're going wrong with what they're doing. And that was really nice to see.
Hopefully there's no awkward moments in front of a prospect or something.
No.
Very good.
No,
So how are you using games at Microsoft or Skype?
So I think the easiest way to describe is there's a lot of value for us on the engineering team to have non-engineers use the product. They much more closely resemble our customers, our users, than the team does. But the problem is, how do you encourage, say, a marketing manager or HR person to install a pre-released software that may have bugs, right? It's a big risk to them because it will impact their job. And so we found by using game mechanics, we can engage non-engineers to not only install and use the product before release, but to take the time to give us feedback. And if something does go wrong, there tends to be a lot of emotion around that, and that point of experience, we can capture that emotion and take it back as feedback on the product, because people will take some extra steps to do that in light of a game, in the context of a game, that they might not otherwise do.
Okay, really good. You've done some research on gamification. We were talking about it briefly.
Sure. Well, part of the reason that our company wanted to get into the notion of research and so forth was because, you talk to so many organizations and they say, yeah, okay, we get it, games are fun, but that doesn't mean it works. And, you even hear some people say, well, excuse me, training isn't supposed to be fun. So one of the things that we wanted to do was to make ourselves very aware of what research supported the effectiveness of game-based learning versus traditionally learning classroom, et cetera. So, a couple things. We follow the research in this area, and for those of you that would like to, we can put together a summary of some of the research, and if you drop by our booth or something, we can send that to you. But there's been a lot of great research around, by Harvard Business Review, and Jean Meister, who she's an author for corporate universities. I'm not sure exactly how she's connected with this group, or if she is, but she might be. Very well known. And then there was a kind of a meta study done by Tracy Stitzman that a lot of validation from a research point of view that, it's not just about the fun. This stuff actually does work when you measure the achievement of learning outcomes. We're doing research currently with one of our clients where in a complex skill like persuasive communication, we've actually gotten them to agree to send a cohort through using a game, a cohort through using traditional e-learning, and a cohort through using a classroom version, teaching essentially the same skill. And we work pretty closely with a company called Knowledge Advisors. They have a product called Metrics That Matter that's based around analytics and measurement and so forth. Don't know if any of their customers are here in the room, but they're actually leveraging their technology, and they've partnered with the customer to do that research. And hopefully in another month or two, we'll have the first of several reports. But the early returns it's just fascinating. And it's something that you really kind of owe it to yourself to try in your organization. If there's a way you've typically done it, try something new and compare the results, not only in terms of attitudinal results, but behavioral results, performance results, to doing it this way. And I think you may be startled with some of the back-end impact that really do have to do with performance. So yeah, they're fun. And we have fun doing what we're doing. But, you know, I think it's about a lot more of that. And I think you can overkill anything, not going to position this as a silver bullet, but properly applied, properly designed can be a really effective delivery strategy.
With that in mind, what kind of tips and tricks should the newcomers to gamification keep in mind? I'll start with you, Ross.
So I was going to add or underscore.
Please.
You're going to agree with me?
Yes, I am. I got your check. No, you may often run into skeptics like Jim who think games are gimmicky and, hey, we don't play here, we work. So you want to go in with a very specific, measurable objective and limit it, you know, as we did in the game when we started this session, very specific, like we want people to learn about others in the room, because it's very easy to get lost and muddy the water if you're too broad. But be very specific with an objective and be very rigorous with your data collection, because you'll want to come back to the skeptics and say, see, I told you so. And so we've done that since day one and have been able to refute a lot of significant backlash around playing at work and being able to show that, oh no, here's without a game mechanic and here's with. And we've seen a range from 4 times to up to 16 times improvement, depending on what we were trying to achieve, just by adding game mechanics.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Dawn? What are some tips or tricks that you've come across?
For me, it was making sure I followed up on that objective and picked the right game for the right reason for the right people. It's very easy to do something, maybe not quite as detailed as we could be, and you would kind of ruin the experience for people by not having a well-planned out game, well-planned out thought. So that would be probably my one thing, is just make sure you're really focusing on the right group and follow up with the measurement. It's very easy to get that in a lot of games because they do have points, badges, and leaderboards, but they also have other mechanics they can apply that you can go back and show that 4 to 16 times increase.
Well, the main tip I would share is keep it simple. A lot of organizations are hesitant to begin implementing gamification simply because they don't know where to start, or we don't have the expertise in game design, or, you know, there's a variety of other things. You know, our top leaders will be skeptical, etc. Keep it simple. Back to the point made by my very intelligent colleagues here. Have a relatively narrow focus, and then what we often do with our clients is we think in terms of, let's map out a crawl, walk, run. Narrow scope, let's do a pilot, let's expose, you know, some relatively small number to, you know, an initial exposure, you know, not tens of thousands, but, you know, whatever relatively small means in your organization. Let's get the reaction, let's measure the result. And you're going to learn a lot more about that to determine where you need to go from there, et cetera. So, you know, that's the thing I would say, is don't make it more complicated than it is. It really isn't very complicated. Just be prepared to be conservative and measure as you go.
We have just a couple minutes left here, and I just wanted to give the opportunity to anybody in the audience, if they had a question about gamification that was burning, that was on their mind. And if not, I don't see any. Oh, I do see somebody's hand up way up there over in the corner. We'll bring the microphone over to you.
You mentioned criteria for selecting initiatives that would be good for gamification. Could you share some of the parameters or the criteria that you use for deciding whether or not a project would lend itself to this approach?
Ross, you want to start?
I think, you know, really any problem, any issue would be a good candidate, but specifically where you're already gathering data that, hey, this is a problem, and you have that data, I think is a great way to start. You know, so if there's a particular you know, area of the work that's lagging, where you're starting to see warning signs in the data, I think, again, you want to be anchored in data, and You probably already have data on problem areas across the company or across your teams. Those are great candidates, and to start small and do small pilots and then be able to tune and see progress. But I really think it's just areas where you need to attract attention or attract effort or increase effort. Really, any candidate is good there.
Don, you want to add to that? Okay, no? One question that I have for the audience here, did you enjoy the game? Raise your hand if you liked the game. Sounds good. Did we achieve the objectives of the second question? Raise your hand. Okay, not as much as, okay. We should have been more selective on what kind of questions could be asked. Excellent. Well, I want to thank the panelists for sharing their knowledge of gamification. And thank you all for attending this presentation. And I believe the next thing coming up is lunch. So thank you very much.